nous sommes très fiers, bien entendu, de publier un livre de Ta-Nehisi Coates, ce grand journaliste et écrivain américain qui, comme vous le savez certainement, a déjà beaucoup de succès aux États-Unis dans le milieu notamment afro-américain. Je ne dirai pas beaucoup de choses. Je pense que, d'abord, je voudrais remercier Lorraine d'avoir organisé cette rencontre. Et je remercie aussi Jake Lamar de modérer cet entretien. Je pense que ce sera quelque chose de très intéressant. Et Maboula aussi, merci beaucoup de dire quelques mots après l'entretien. Je pense que ça va enrichir ce qui aura été dit auparavant. 2 mots sur Présence africaine peut-être. C'est une maison d'édition qui a été créée en 1949, donc ça fait déjà, ça fera 70 ans l'année prochaine, par Alioune Diop, un Sénégalais, qui a eu le courage d'éditer des auteurs africains qui ne trouvaient pas d'éditeurs, par exemple africains et d'origine africaine, puisque par exemple il y a Aimé Césaire qui a publié la plupart de ses œuvres à Présence africaine, Cheikh Anta Diop aussi. La plupart des classiques africains sont publiés chez Présence africaine, puisque la maison était à l'époque la première maison d'édition africaine. Et nous sommes restés là, nous sommes indépendants, nous ne faisons pas partie d'un groupe éditorial, ce qui rend les choses d'ailleurs pas toujours très faciles. Mais nous tenons bon et nous appelons la jeunesse à enrichir encore le catalogue, ce qui d'ailleurs a commencé à être fait par des jeunes venus d'Afrique, mais aussi un jeune américain comme, après tout, Ta-Nehisi est jeune encore. Donc voilà, ça c'est le 109 qui va faire que la maison, j'espère, continuera d'exister encore longtemps. Merci beaucoup d'être venu. Merci.
And now I'm going to present our interlocutors and wonderful people for this evening. First of all, Ta-Nehisi Coates, where is he? Is he coming? He's coming. I will introduce him in his absence. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a distinguished writer in residence at NYU's Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute. He is the author of the best-selling books The Beautiful Struggle, We Were 8 Years in Power, and Between the World and Me, which won the National Book Award in 2015. Ta-Nehisi is the recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship. He is also the current author of the Marvel Comics, The Black Panther, and Captain America. Ta-Nehisi is going to be in dialogue with Jake Lamar, who was born in 1961. I was surprised you gave your year of birth. 1961, and grew up in the Bronx, New York. He has lived in Paris, France since 1993. He is the author of a memoir, seven novels, numerous essays, reviews and short stories, and a play. His most recent work, Viper's Dream, is both a crime novel and a radio drama set in the jazz world of Harlem between 1936 and 1961. Your birth year. He is a recipient of the Lyndhurst Prize for his first book, Bourgeois Blues, a prestigious French National Book Center grant for his novel Postérité, France's Grand Prize for Best Foreign Thriller for his novel The Last Integrationist, and a Beaumarchais Fellowship for his play Brothers in Exile. He is currently working on a memoir about his life in Paris. And our second act tonight is going to be a response by Maboula Soumahoro, who is an associate professor in the English department at the Université François Rabelais in Tours. She has also taught at the Paris Institute of Sciences Politiques. Her research focuses on the African diaspora and American Black nationalisms. She first taught at Bennington College in 2003 and has since taught at the Bard Prison Initiative, Barnard College, and Columbia University, where she was also invited as a visiting scholar. She co-organized the celebration of Black History Month in France. She was appointed by Prime Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault, as a member of the National Committee for the Memory and History of Slavery. I want to thank you all for your presence this evening, and I hope you enjoy yourselves. Thank you very much.
Here he is. Glass bottle of water there. Sorry. So just let me begin by saying what a thrill and an honor it is to be asked to discuss Ta-Nehisi Coates' book with him tonight. Over the past few years, Ta-Nehisi Coates has produced one important work after another. Line by line, he's a terrific writer. But I think with Ta-Nehisi's work, we are also seeing a rare alignment of a writer and a moment in history. At a time when more opinions are dispensed farther and wider than ever before, Ta-Nehisi Coates is giving us one of the indispensable voices of this era. When I read his essay, Fear of a Black President, in The Atlantic in 2012, I realized that no one had written about the significance of Barack Obama in this way. Reading that piece, I thought of a phrase from Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, ice water visioned. There was a bracing lucidity about the way Ta-Nehisi wrote about racial questions and attitudes in the USA. So thank you so much for joining us here tonight, Ta-Nehisi. Fear of a Black President is included in We Were 8 Years in Power, Huit ans au pouvoir in French. It's a collection, We Were 8 Years in Power is a collection of essays you wrote for The Atlantic, and you've included a brief introductory essay for each of the collected pieces, filling the reader in on what was going on in your life at the time, giving us a wonderful insight into your evolution as a writer. The line, We Were 8 Years in Power, has such a poignant, elegiac ring to it. Could you please tell us where the title of this collection comes from?
Yeah, I mean, this on, I don't think, do I have to hit a button?
Yeah, there's a switch there. Knock it up, yeah.
Okay, now, there we go. Okay, can you hear me? Are we good? Okay. It's so funny because back when I was on Twitter, and this is a story about why it was good to leave Twitter. But I announced the book on Twitter. All these people wrote back and they were like, who were we? We weren't in power. Like people took it as like a celebratory, we were 8 years, and I was like, God, poetry's dead. Like there's no irony, nobody gets, and the subtitle was in America, it's like nobody cares. But it's not celebratory, it's exactly as you said, it's elegiac. And it was uttered, I believe in 1895, by Congressman Thomas Miller of South Carolina. And Congressman Miller had been among that collection of senators and congressmen and governors, et cetera. Oh, here we go, this is much better. Who had come to power after the fall of slavery, post-1865, and then after the fall of the black codes that followed even that. And you had this brief moment, what Du Bois would call abolition democracy. This brief moment of almost democracy where you had actually black people with some degree of power throughout the South. You had, black senator, black governor, I believe it was, in Louisiana. You had numerous black representatives, black folks in state legislatures, black folks in, judicial appointments. And this is like directly after slavery. Literally, there were people who would walk off a plantation and within a year or two would find themselves in the state house, of a place like South Carolina. And there was all of this rhetoric which is completely unsurprising. All this racist rhetoric about how horrible they were, about all the awful things that they did. If you ever, see Birth of a Nation, that was the kind of propaganda that was around at the time about these folks. It took many years later for historians like Du Bois to rehabilitate the image, of Reconstruction era abolition democracy, and point out that in fact a lot of these folks were in fact legitimate legislators, legitimate governors, etc. Of course there was some graft and corruption, but this is the 19th century, just like there was graft and corruption everywhere, but nothing particularly remarkable. And for black folks that was really, really important. The ethic of twice as good is not a modern invention. It's actually quite old, in fact. And so if you have any trouble, do I need to slow down? You okay? Okay. All right, okay. You have to be considerate of the entrepet. The idea of being twice as good was not something that we invented within the lifetime of our parents. It was quite old. Everyone in that time knew that it was especially important coming out of slavery to prove that black people could govern and could govern effectively. And so what Thomas Miller is saying in 1895, he finds himself at a congressional convention where throughout the South, white folks have basically reclaimed power. And they have not reclaimed power democratically, they have reclaimed power at gunpoint. There are numerous coups in South Carolina, in North Carolina, in Louisiana, actual fights in the streets, cannons, armies, everything. America acts as though it's been a continuous democracy since 1776. It has not. It is not. In fact, there was an armed takeover of the South, and this is at the end of that period where they're seeking to codify it in the Constitution of South Carolina, and Thomas Miller is stunned. And he says, we were 8 years in power. During this time, we reconstructed the state. We fixed the health system. We fixed the schools. We fixed the penal system. To give you an idea of what that meant, the advent of public schooling in the South came from the emancipated slaves and the freemen of the South. There was no real public school system in the American South before black people got the chance to govern. They created it. They didn't just create it for black people either. They created it for the entire state. So he says, why would you do this? Why would you, not just take back government, but completely disenfranchise us after we've done so much for the state? And Du Bois, writing in I believe 1937, in his classic work, Black Reconstruction, says that Miller, in his estimation of things, made a crucial mistake. He believed, and most black people of that time, and I would argue most black people, at least in America today, believed that the enemy was bad Negro government. The idea that the problem was corruption, the problem was one's comportment, the problem was acting like the stereotypical nigger. And what Du Bois argued was, in fact, the real problem was good Negro government. The problem was that they had succeeded. That was the actual problem. Had they gone in and verified everything that white people already thought of freed people, where white people already thought of emancipated slaves, there would have been no problem at all. There wouldn't have been no need for guns to take back power. It would have been quite easy to do so. So here we are some 120, 130 years after Thomas Miller made that proclamation. And I think one can see in his stunned response, the stunned response also of the Obama White House after 8 years. Here's a White House that comes in after a catastrophe that's not quite as bad as the Civil War, I grant you, but it is coming in the midst of the longest American war in history. It's coming in the midst of an economic collapse. It's coming in the midst of a country that basically, people forget this. George Bush has been rehabilitated as a watercolor artist now. With some help from Michelle Obama. I've seen that, they're best friends now. They trade mints and everything. That's fine. I think everybody should have friends. But at the same time, I think people should remember what happened. I think people should not forget Katrina. I think it's a good idea, and more importantly, the governmental response. But that was the backdrop through which Barack Obama came to power, complete and total catastrophe, without which I don't think Barack Obama ever would have come to power in the first place. But he did. And who represented good Negro government more so than Barack Obama? One considers the amount of corruption and trials and investigations that there are at this moment in this White House. One considers a president who comes to office bragging about sexual assault, who has sexual assault and sexual assault charges trailing him all the way through, who nominates to the Supreme Court another justice, it's insane, with sexual harassment and sexual assault allegations against him. It's impossible to imagine a Barack Obama in that position because Barack Obama had to, be emblematic of this notion of good Negro government, not just personally, but in his governmental style. Everything had to be not just twice as good, but parfait. Had to always be completely on point. And the belief was if one did that, that was the tool to our liberation. White people would see us, they would see that we were in fact worthy of governing, they would see we were in fact worthy of the franchise, we were worthy of being American citizens. But in fact what happened was at any point during those 8 years, the majority or a significant minority of the opposition party believed that Barack Obama was not even born in America, which is to say that he was never a legitimate president in the first place. And the end result of that was the election of Donald Trump. So that was how I got the title for the book.
So, right.
Sorry.
So you're making a parallel between the 8 years that might be defined as the heart of Reconstruction, say 1868 to 1876, making a parallel between those 8 years and 2009 to 2017.
You should have answered the question.
Yeah. Well, once the South had its redemption, it was another 80 years before Brown versus Board of Education and the birth of the modern civil rights movement. So in making this parallel, do you think that Trump following Obama is not just a reassertion of white supremacy, but maybe a giant pendulum swing against racial equality that could last a very long time?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an exact parallel because, these parallels of Reconstruction periods have gone on for quite some time. The historian John Hope Franklin, for instance, deemed the Civil Rights Movement the second Reconstruction. So it's not, exact. When I read the phrase and when I read Du Bois's rendering of the phrase and his reasoning, I saw a lot that was familiar. It's almost like an echo of something. That's how I would more put it. And I think that's important because Trump does not arise from the ether. You have an opposition party which has made racist appeals, even if quiet, sort of sublimated, subvert, racist appeals. A part of its, politics for at least the past 50 years or so. And with Trump, very intelligently and very astutely realized was there was no need to be covert at all. There was no need for subtext. And he realized how much power, in fact, there was in just coming out and outwardly saying what the Republican Party had in fact been saying for decades before that. I think that will be catastrophic. I think basically what you had was, and again, this is why I think it's important to connect, Trump to the past. Right now, you have 9 Supreme Court justices. 4 out of the 9 were appointed by presidents who, in their initial run for office, did not receive a majority. The Senate, I believe, represents somewhere in the range of 45% of all Americans. Doesn't represent actually a majority of Americans. You have a president right now who lost the popular vote by 3 million votes. So at the very least, in the presidency, the Supreme Court, and the Senate, arguably the 3 most powerful organs of government in the country, you effectively have minority rule already. There is some sort of mechanism, as difficult as it is, as weighted as it is, for electing new senators. There is some sort of mechanism for electing a new president, as difficult as it is with the Electoral College. There really is no real tested mechanism for changing your Supreme Court. Not in, in a sort of, not in the period of our lives, because these guys have lifetime appointments. I believe Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think, who is, on the liberal side of the court, I think she's 85 years old. So it's quite possible that Trump will get another appointment. And if he does, you will have a situation where, arguably, again, the strongest organ of governmental power in the country was created through minority rule. I mean, this is American apartheid. That is what we're tipping toward, and some would argue it is, in fact, where we've always been. It's just more overt and obvious now.
Well, yeah, which leads me to my next point and question. Like so many of us back in 2017, your life experience as an African American made you skeptical about the possibility of a black presidency. But in the heady days of the 2008 campaign, you started to rethink things. And you write, and we were 8 years in power, I had been wrong about the possibility of Barack Obama, and it seemed fair to consider that I might be wrong about a good deal more. If we had misjudged America's support for a black man running to occupy the White House, perhaps I had misjudged the nature of my country. In those days, I imagined racism as a tumor that could be isolated and removed from the body of America, not as a pervasive system, both native and essential to that body. Now, a decade later, considering the backlash against the Obama presidency up to, including, and beyond the electoral victory of Donald Trump, has that led you to believe today that racism is part of the DNA of America, something permanent in the system?
Well, what I would say is one of the great things about that period in which I wrote that book is I had a job that allowed, I was very privileged as a journalist because I had a job that allowed for a lot of time to read. And so two things were going on. In real time, I was watching the first black president, and in my own personal time, it was almost as if like I was going back for a graduate degree because I had so much time to just read and just, consume. And that's reflected in the book. And so the notion that I argue for in what you just read, that racism is not a piece of something over here, part of the body that can be excised, but is native and important and significant to the body itself, is a reflection on much of the reading that I was doing at the time. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about. And I've said this before, in the American conception of racism and white supremacy, the idea is that America is mostly good, but it's made some errors. And we have to, and the liberal rendering of this is we've made some errors, and what we need to do is we need to come to terms with those errors, be honest about them, be straight about them. We can take down these Confederate statues, which, is fine. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but we take down these Confederate statues, we confess, certain sins, but generally, our conception of America as a country remains intact as it is. The problem is, in the first place I really came into contact with this was this great book, American Freedom, American Slavery, about the great historian Edmund Morgan. And what he argues is, in fact, American democracy is not contrary to slavery. American democracy is, in fact, the result of slavery, which sounds crazy when you first hear it. But he argues that, in fact, it was slavery that gave America the economic security, the economic base. It was slavery, and we're talking about early colonial slavery. They gave it a bound working class, which is to say a working class that could be deprived completely of all rights, totally. Which was the difference between, say, a slave and, say, an indentured servant who could always appeal, to the queen as a citizen of the Commonwealth. Black people brought into this country as aliens were denied that completely. And that sort of stability, that class stability, that ability to extract resources from people and not have that regulated at all, that ability to, in fact, actually turn the resources into more resources by breeding people's kids and then selling the kids and selling the workers. These are things that you could never really do with the same way with an actual working class out of England. That eventually blooms into a situation where, as the country expands, black people become the largest portion of wealth in the country, the largest wealth asset in the country in 1860 at the advent of the Civil War. So that in a state like Mississippi, where the majority of people are black, in a state like South Carolina, where the majority of people are black, in a state like Alabama, where half the people are black. You are not just talking about half the population. You are saying that those bodies literally are the greatest concentration of wealth in that state. That's what they represent. They represent more than the businesses. They represent more than the banks. They represent more than the harbors. 4 million black people enslaved. That is an incredible economic interest. The thing I often compare it to is housing. In America, everybody knows it's a little different here, but in America, everybody knows housing is just totally essential, not just to the way we think about our economy, but to the way we think about ourselves as citizens. Becoming a homeowner means something in a particular way. And people aspire to be homeowners. It's a privilege to actually be a homeowner. So it's not just a representation of wealth, it's a representation of one's place in society and the political order. And if one entered into America today and said, hey, we're going to liquidate all the wealth one has accumulated through home ownership, and then we're going to make home ownership illegal, there might be a war over that. And the war might even be fought by people who do not own homes but aspire to, in fact, own homes. Because the institution is something that people aspire to, and slavery was very much the same thing. This lasted in America for 250 years. And then what followed that was not the end of slavery, but in fact a kind of quasi-slavery in the South, a system of Jim Crow, a continued system of preventing black people from having access to the governmental institutions in the North. So when you see that, when you see that, one can only begin to speak of any sort of democracy for black people, and thus for the entire country, 50 years ago or so. And you see that even during that 50 years, people are tampering with it, trying to make America less democratic, trying to rob black people of the rights to vote. You have to start to say that's a part of the thing. You know, it's like, I say this in America, racism is not a bump on the road, it's the road itself. It becomes the way you actually got there. There's so much so that if you extracted it, you would have to say, what is America? If you took white supremacy and everything that resulted from it out of America, what would American history then be? What would American culture then be without the blues that black people sang, having experienced the white supremacy? What would it be without the resources that was extracted from the bodies of black people? What would the entire concept of citizenship be? Say for the Italians who came to America and were not initially considered white, the Irish that came to America and were not initially considered white, the Jews who came to America and were not considered white and were only allowed to become citizens through the force of anti-black racism. It's quite difficult. This is very different than just taking a tumor out. You have to take the skeleton out completely. Yeah. And then you say, well, what are you now? Yeah. You know?
So you've met Barack Obama several times. Mm-hmm. You write with some self-deprecating humor about some of the early encounters. Mm-hmm. But you did come to have a really interesting relationship and some enriching encounters. After Trump's victory, he insisted he was still optimistic about America. So as someone who knows Barack Obama personally, unlike most of us, is he just in denial about the depth of racism in America, or does he feel he has to present a positive image at all times for the good of the country?
Well, I wouldn't say I know him personally. Every time I've talked to him, it's been a professional, and I've been there as a journalist, which means he's presenting himself to me as a, you know what I mean? I mean, he's aware of that, so it's not like, we're kicking it, drinking beers, and watching the game. It's been about the job, so he has to be, on job, just as I am. Having said that, I do think I feel as much as possible, that I can take some measure of the sincerity of that opinion, and I think it's deeply felt. I don't think it's in denial. I think it's highly unusual to have one's initial experiences be what Barack Obama's initial experiences were. And that is to say, to be born, in Hawaii, far away from the contiguous United States, where the racial dynamic is somewhat different, by which I do not mean non-racist, but somewhat different, among white people who don't have family members to reinforce the edicts of anti-black racism in the same way. So his earliest experiences with white people were loving. And I mean, he said this. He says, when he, would go into, downstate Illinois, or he would go into campaign in places where very few black people lived, he saw his grandparents. Now, this was a tremendous asset when running for president. It's actually exactly what you would want. And very few black people could, I think, look at white people like that and see their grandparents. So it helped quite a bit. You know what I mean? It really, really was helpful. But, again, going back to the title of the book, the tragedy is that also might lead you, like the skepticism that black people have towards white people is also a very healthy survival mechanism. And so while it might be good in terms of running for president, I wouldn't want my son going through the world like that.
Yeah, well, you have this perfect summation of what you just said here. Obama's greatest misstep was born directly out of his greatest insight. Only Obama, a black man who emerged from the best of white America, and thus could sincerely trust white America, could be so certain that he could achieve broad national appeal. And yet, only a black man with that same biography could underestimate his opposition's resolve to destroy him. So what does that say about the chances of a second black president, President Harris or President Booker?
Sorry, I have specific beef with Cory Booker, so I mean,
okay.
We can get into that some other time or here or whatever. As for, I actually think the possibility of a second black president is pretty high in my lifetime, but I think it's pretty high because of the way that the parties have sorted. The Republican Party is basically an all-white party. A white male party. The Democratic Party is significantly more diverse, but there's states that you actually need where, like you take a South Carolina, 60% of the primary voters are black. So the system almost favors, to some extent, not totally, but to some extent, favors, I think, candidates of color to ultimately get the Democratic nomination. And then at that point, it's wide open. So it wouldn't shock me if you actually had another, black or brown president, or even Asian American president in the near future.
Okay. Now, as you point out, Donald Trump's political career began by questioning Obama's legitimacy. It was birtherism, you write, not trade, not jobs, not isolationism, that launched Trump's foray into electoral politics. And contrary to what the US media is always telling us about Trump's support being the white working class, Trump won 60% of the white vote, and he won whites across age, class, and regional lines. The fact of a black president, you write, insulted Trump personally. Replacing Obama is not enough. Trump has made the negation of Obama's legacy the foundation of his own. And while one can imagine that a great many Trump supporters share Trump's hostility toward Obama on racist grounds, you also write, every Trump voter is most certainly not a white supremacist, just as every white person in the Jim Crow South was not a white supremacist. But every Trump voter felt it acceptable to hand the fate of the country over to one. So that's a damning notion about the persistence of white supremacy. What you just outlined in terms of electoral politics, do you see it as white America versus the rest of America?
No. I mean, because all of white America didn't vote for Trump. I see people who think being white, people who think of it as very, very important to who they are, as the force that will probably destroy us all. I think it's a deeply dangerous, deeply malignant force that is not to be underestimated. And let me explain what I mean. The force of this starts with black people, right? So it starts with just birtherism. And that's just it. You know what I mean? But so strong was the appeal of birtherism these folks were willing to hand over the nuclear bomb codes. It's incredible. I mean, it's even hard to get straight in one's head. We're willing to hand over the nuclear arsenal for the first time to someone who had neither served in the military nor served in government at all, who seemed to have zero familiarity, with the world and events around the world, who thought nothing of threatening other countries with nuclear weapons, who conducted policy with North Korea via tweet, who, as I said, quite earlier, had numerous accusations of sexual harassment and sexual assault, who just has never impressed anyone with his particular intellect. That's okay, as long as you hate the nigger. It's all okay as long as you hate the nigger. We would rather live in this world, or we would rather not live in this world at all than have to live in this world with them. People who believe that being white, and by which I mean not simply the possession of characteristics that we associate with those who have predominantly European ancestry, but by which I mean people who believe that ancestry correctly tells us something about who should occupy what position in the hierarchy of a country. People who believe that, and it's clear that quite a few people do. Mm-hmm. It's clear that Trump does. I mean, a man who would openly say, listen, this guy can't judge my case because he's a Mexican. He's a Mexican is a direct quote, not a paraphrase. If that's the basis of appeal, if it's that important to you, what hope is there for all of the attendant issues that go along with that? Because it's not like they just appointed this guy to be in charge of black people or brown people or Asian. I mean, they gave him the economy, gave him the fate of the environment, gave him the health of food, waters, their military, handed it all over to a buffoon just for the sake of hating the nigger. And the spick, I should include that. And the Muslim, I should include all of that because all of that's true. All of that was part of it. I don't want to act like, anti-black racism was the whole thing. That is scary. When people are that determined, and this is like in I think the essay you were referring to, and I guess in the epilogue too, this is why I try to make that case with such force. People who deny that, who say, oh, it was just the economy. Oh, it was just, globalization. It was just economic anxiety. Who knows more about economic anxiety than black people? We did not then go and decide to nominate whatever the black equivalent of Donald Trump would be for president.
Kanye West.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't like, hey, let's go embrace such and such. That's not our response to that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So, the notion that folks who, in fact, have the most economic privilege, if you look at it, ethnically, somehow because, they get a little upset, about stagnating wages or whatever, which, are a problem. The notion that that's even why they then decided, to vote for Donald Trump, as though these things just became a problem during, the Obama era, I think is to me not just laughable, but is itself also dangerous. You too are a denialist then. And so I think what's scary for me is not just that you actually have a Trump, but that America has an intellectual class, by which I include journalists, writers, academics, etc., a large portion of whom are themselves in denial and effectively, enrolled in a business of speaking politically correct to white people.
His unwitting helpers in a way. Yeah.
Yes, useful idiots.
Yeah. Now let's talk about Trump as a particular case, and tell me if you agree with me, because I mean, as you point out, there are plenty of white supremacists in American politics, but it feels that in the case of Trump, white supremacy has attached itself to a bizarre cult of personality. And you cite Trump's statement from January 2016, before a single Republican vote had been cast in Iowa or New Hampshire, when Trump famously said, "I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any votes." You say that Trump was bragging, but my sense watching that clip from the still early days of the campaign is that Trump himself was surprised by this. It's like it's just sinking in with him that his supporters will give him a pass for anything. One could say that there is a sort of grotesque charisma about this man. So what I'd like to know is if you think beyond white nationalism, what is the bizarre appeal of this particular individual?
I think that's it. I don't think there's much more. I think if you stripped him, well, let me rephrase that, excuse me. I think there's misogyny. I think there's that. But if we just include all of those under, you know, the phrase of personal and structural bigotry, I don't think there's much more. I think if you strip Trump of that, you just don't have Trump, period. Okay. You know, I just don't think it's an accident that his career begins in birtherism. Like people act like this is some sort of like coincidence or something. And I think to believe that requires a deep ignorance of American history, by which I mean the force with which, like, this isn't the first time that we've seen, you know, these forces play a role in our elections. One only has to go back to, you know, the Republican primary, you know, when Bush is running against McCain in a debate over, say, the Confederate flag, which still, you know, dogs the country to this very day. To the campaign that they ran against John McCain, where they tried to insinuate that he had a black daughter during the South Carolina primary. To the last time before that, when there was another Bush in office, where you find, you know, the Willie Horton campaign. To back to Reagan, who launches his presidential run in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where the 3 civil rights workers were killed.
Just 16 years earlier.
Just 16 years earlier. And then back to Nixon with his law and order campaign and his subversion of the civil rights movement and his Southern strategy. So you actually can't find a Republican president post-civil rights that hasn't, you know, as they say, blown this dog whistle before. Again, you know, what Trump realized, I think, was that one can actually win on only this, with, you know, some misogyny thrown in, with some bigotry at other people thrown in. And this is the dark secret, because in American politics, people have conditioned themselves to believe that not only are the people always right, but the people are essentially good. The American people are essentially good, which does not reflect any understanding of humanity that any artist, for instance, would maintain. By which I mean the very people whose job it is to, you know, consider the nature of people. And no one would say people are in mass generally good.
No Frenchman would say that.
No. But that's at the core of American politics. So one can't say, well, there are a large number of people who really were influenced by some bad shit. Like that's hard for people to actually say in America, because they just don't want to believe. And in their minds, I have to say, you know, by American people, they really mean white people. You know, it's very difficult for them to say that, you know, a large number, a critical mass of white people in this country, strictly for reasons of whiteness, did this.
Now, I know you wince at the term public intellectual, but insofar as that role has been thrust upon you, you write that sometimes you sense something when you speak to black readers about the persistence of white supremacy. You write, "For blacks born under the burden, there is a need to believe that a better day is on the horizon, that their lives, their children's lives, and their grandchildren's lives are not forever condemned to carry that weight, which white people can only but sense. I felt this need whenever I spoke to audiences about my writing, since invariably I would be asked what I could say that would give the audience hope." Now, given what you just said about demographic trends in America, would that be an area where you see hope? The fact that because of multiculturalism, because of the changing face of America, 50 years from now, there will be more Americans who look like Barack Obama than Americans who look like Donald Trump. Will that multiculturalism lead inevitably to the death of white nationalism?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Certainly not inevitably. I mean, it may, but I would not bet any amount of money on that, because that presumes that whiteness actually has anything to do with how somebody looks. And it doesn't. It has to do with a decision to invest certain things in how people look. And where and when we decide to invest has been changeable across history and across the world. What black means in America today is not what it meant in Louisiana 200 years ago. It's not what it means in Brazil today. People can, you know, move the line. As I, you know, just started talking at the beginning. You know, you had Irish folks who came to America, Italian folks who came to America, Jews who came to America, who today everybody agrees is white. But, that was not the conclusion at the time. People make political decisions about this. We have a history in America, for instance, in Mississippi, of Asian Americans, suing actually to be white. And I'm not saying that to condemn Asian Americans. They wanted access to the kind of institutions that the state had to offer that were, generally prohibited to black people. So it's, from that perspective, understandable. What I'm saying is that the presumption that somehow demographics will inevitably lead to change proceeds primarily from the flaw of believing that race is an actual thing. That actually means there's some sort of meaning to it that can't be changed. It is an objective, observable reality that policy and laws can't actually have influence over and change. That's not the history of America. That's not the history of the idea of race in the world. The second thing that it presumes is a kind of democracy in America that, as I said at the beginning, has never actually existed. We're in a country right now, not here in France, but, we're in the, where I happen to live mostly. In that sense, we have a country that at this very moment is fiddling, with the laws of democracy. As I, said, we almost at this point have a majority Supreme Court that was not appointed by the majority of the American people. Demographics can't address that. If you have a system that is designed to favor a minority and was designed in that way with the system of slavery in mind, by which I mean cannot be separated out from a history of racism and white supremacy, one should not put one's hope, in the fact of numbers. The final piece of this is the fact of what mass incarceration is in America, and what a great insult it is to any notion of democracy in and of itself. Which
is an absolutely brilliant essay, by the way.
Thank you.
Mass incarceration and the black family.
Thank you.
In this collection.
Thank you. The incarceration rate in America is unlike anything that's really been known in history and really is known in the world at this point in time. And I think, as Michelle Alexander argued in her book, The New Jim Crow, it's pretty irrefutable that the system is a direct response to the liberation struggles of black people and the attempt to actually substitute one system of control for another that was falling. There are constitutional implications to that. The first is that in the 13th Amendment, which freed African Americans, incarceration is the only tool through which one can still be enslaved legally in America. So when you're incarcerated, you are by law, by the Constitution, a slave of the state. It's not a mistake that clause is in the same amendment that freed black people, and it's not a mistake that black people comprise a relatively large minority of the people in prison. The second thing is, when you're incarcerated, your right to vote is removed. And when you come out of prison in America, in a large number of states, you still can't get the right to vote. In some states, it's removed for life. So when you have large numbers of black people going through the carceral system, this has an impact on the democracy. It's already distorted. And so I think optimists, or folks who are naive or deluded, I would go so far as to say, who put their money, banking on, the idea one day will outnumber them. I don't think, again, that's the importance of history. History doesn't reflect that as a notion that one should put any sort of, money on.
Mm-hmm. Now, your book, Between the World and Me, had a phenomenal success in the USA and around the world. And that success has led to a lot of criticism that I usually find, let's just say, wrong-headed. So I'm not going to dwell on it here. But the most maddening criticism of your work for me is when people say it was somehow written to curry favor with white readers. There is absolutely nothing on any page of that book to support that claim. I would say quite the contrary. But you raise a particular question yourself in We Were 8 Years in Power, though you don't really answer it here. The question you pose is, why do white people like what I write? Would you care to take a stab at an answer?
Not really. I mean, the reason why I don't answer, and I guess I should have explicitly said it, is because it's ultimately irrelevant. You know, if you're an artist or if you're a writer and you define yourself by strictly by your audience, or you spend too much time thinking about that, it can be very detrimental to the project that you're doing. Look, what's most important, I was telling my dad about this last night. I was doing an event at NYU, well, actually it was somebody else's event. I was there where I teach, and I was just there trying to support, and we went to a reception afterwards. And there was a brother who came up to me afterwards at the reception, and I could just tell by his build, he had a long scar across his cheek. I just tell he just got out, right? He had just gotten out of prison. And he came up to me, introduced himself, and he said, listen, man, I just have to tell you, when Between the World and Me came out, brothers was passing that joint around in the yard. Doing ciphers, trying to figure out what meant what. He said, I just got out from a 12-year bid. He said, I read everything you wrote, watched all your videos, and I really would appreciate if you just took a selfie with me, because the brothers back there are not going to believe that I met you. If the price of that is white readers coming to see, then I'll take it. I'll take it. It's well worth it. Who I want to talk to, I talk to. And whoever else wants to come see me talk, it's fine. It's okay. It's beautiful. As long as, the brothers in the yard are passing it around, as long as I can, God bless, come back here to Presence Africaine, you know what I mean? As long as I can have my wife and my family with me, I'm okay. You know what I mean? And whoever else is listening is whoever else is listening. The flip side of that is everybody wants as many readers as they possibly can get. In America, because of the demographics, that means white people. People who claim to not want that are lying. They're being deeply, deeply, and I should, just be clear about that too, I mean, I want those folks, but obviously I want as many people as I can to see, what I'm doing and to read what I'm doing. And so I don't know what it means, you know what I mean, to feel some type of way about that. But I do think one of the really quick ways I could probably betray myself is to start thinking about it too much. Well,
if you don't mind, I'll share a brief anecdote, because I assigned Between the World and Me to an adult creative writing class. Americans who were here in Europe taking creative writing, all of them were white, and what blew them away about the book is that they'd never looked at America in this way before. And there was one woman, a Mormon from Utah, who was incredibly moved by the form of your book and the fact that it was a letter to your son, because she was trying to protect her daughter from the sexual predators in her community, and felt like what you were writing to your son was like something she'd want to say to her daughter. And I just saw this incredible empathy come out in people who just had never thought about things this way. So that would be my answer to why.
But see, that's beautiful. I mean, I think one of the things that in any work of art that I love, people begin with the specific, and in the specific they find what's human. You don't at least the art that transcends out of experiences that I am not from, that affect me. It's not that they make this effort to transcend. I love Grapes of Wrath. I love The Great Gatsby. These are not books that in any real explicit way are about black people. But what Steinbeck is doing, what Fitzgerald is doing, is you're getting to something so core and so specific about the people you're talking about, that what you actually reach is their humanity. And then I can see myself in there. You know what I mean? I don't need you to really be thinking about me. You know what I mean? If you do your job about if you talk to who you're supposed to be talking to, I'll feel it. I'll see it. And then I can, interpret in the same way and, carry it over to my experience. The example I always use is, listen, if I go see some feminist professor or feminist writer, talking about, the effects of misogyny and, privileges that, I enjoy as a man, you don't gotta spoon feed me, man. Talk like I'm not in the room. Say all the angry, shit you would say if I wasn't there. And I'll get it, you know what I mean? I'll get it figured out. I'll get there, you know what I mean? If you're speaking to the deepest human part of that piece, you know, I'll get there. That's just been my experience with history. That's been my experience with literature across the board. And it's what I really, you know, attempt to do in my own writing.
In We Were 8 Years in Power, you write, "The American story, which was my story, was not a tale of triumph, but a majestic tragedy. Between the World and Me, as I mentioned, was written in the form of a letter to your son. Last year on Meet the Press, Chuck Todd asked you, 'Are you optimistic about a future for your son in this country?' And you replied, 'I'm optimistic about my son,' which was a great answer. But let me press you a bit here. Is expatriation a viable option for you? And what do you see in your son's potential American future?
No, I wouldn't leave America. You know, it feels cliche to say this, but first of all, actually, I like America. Let's just be clear about that. First of all, I like America. I'm against the idea of countries being defined by their politics. That's not how you experience a country with its people, with its culture. It's not like you, at least I don't. I mean, maybe people do. I do know people that everywhere, you know, they go, they want to talk about Trump, or they want to talk about that's just not, you know, my experience. I like the South, you know what I mean? But it's my home, you know what I mean? It's where I'm from. It's where all my, you know, ancestors are, you know, going back to the time of enslavement. It's where my family is. It's where my struggle and my war is. I just feel like it's like such a privilege to say, not only am I gonna leave this fight behind, but I'm gonna leave everybody who does not have the privilege of abandoning this fight behind too. And I'm gonna come over here to France and drink my wine and eat my cheese and, you know what I mean? Because the fact is, you'll come over here to France and you'll find the same people in a very, very similar, if not the same struggle. And what will you do then? You know, because if they see you trying to, you know, escape, like they know. And so I think like, you know, I can't, again, this is that human thing. My sense is that people will lose respect for you. The very reason for which they, you know, come to your work and love what you do. You know, if you're just an escapist, you know, if I wrote, you know, about the murder of my friend Prince Jones simply so that I could escape, I mean, I ain't built like that. Like, I don't really have it like that. You know, I fear for my kid like I fear for, you know, the country. You know, I think he's a good kid. I think he's a solid kid. I think he's really intelligent. You know, I think he has all the, you know, personal, you know, qualities that I wanted in a son. But it's very tough to be optimistic, you know, about the country and its future at this point. I don't think the country has earned that. I don't think its politics have earned that.
Well, no, I think of the title of your first book, The Beautiful Struggle. I mean, it's as if to say, well, this is what America is, and you have to find grace and meaning in the struggle. Would that be an accurate way of putting it? Your work has been hugely popular in France, and wasn't crazy about the title they gave Between the World and Me in French, but clearly you struck a nerve with French readers, whose origins are in other countries, in Africa and Asia and the Caribbean. And though our talk this evening has been in our native tongue, you are fluent in French.
Pas encore.
A couple of years ago, I watched you take questions at Paris 8 in Saint-Denis in French for 4 hours.
That was crazy. Wow. That was forced to do that. That was insane.
You did it brilliantly. My brain was mush after that. I don't know. That was impressive, Ta-Nehisi. But anyway, I'm using this as a segue to invite Maboula to the stage to join the conversation.
Bonsoir. J'espère que le micro est bien placé. Bonsoir Ta-Nehisi.
Bonsoir Maboula.
Ça va?
Oui, ça va.
Tu parles bien français?
Je sais.
Tu n'as pas besoin de casque?
Non, j'essaie sans le casque.
D'accord, très bien. Je vais parler lentement.
Ok, merci.
Je vais commencer par les remerciements parce que les remerciements sont importants. Donc tout d'abord, merci à Reed Hall et merci à Lauren Wolf pour cet accueil. Merci à Présence Africaine et Suzanne Diop pour avoir donné l'opportunité de cette collaboration entre Présence Africaine et l'association que je préside qui s'appelle Black History Month. Merci à l'ambassade des États-Unis et particulièrement aux affaires culturelles, Madame Randianina Pekou. Je ne sais pas si elle est là ce soir, mais en tout cas, Madame Pekou trouve toujours des moyens créatifs de continuer à soutenir Black History Month en dépit des présidents à la Maison-Blanche. Donc, merci également aux membres de Black History Month qui sont dans la salle, tout particulièrement Cynthia Tocni, Fabrice Tarot Anne-Laure Ferron, et puis tous les soutiens de Black History Month, Christelle Dumas, Rachida Nasser, et je suis toujours très contente quand Naomi Soumahoro est dans la salle. Je voudrais enfin terminer en remerciant mes très chers collègues, mes partners in crime, Dr. Tina Kempt et Dr. Kayama Glover, avec qui nous continuons à travailler, que ce soit à Paris ou à New York, dans ce précieux Africana Studies Department de Barnard College. Donc merci Jake Lamar pour la modération de cette conversation et merci Ta-Nehisi pour ton travail. I'm going to speak in English.
Oh, pas français. Moi, je suis black.
Don't worry. Trust me. Trust me. So tonight, I want to be Maryse Condé for a moment. Please allow me. I want to be Maryse Condé because, yes, she was just awarded the Alternative Nobel Prize for Literature. Her work has thus been recognized by a major international prize. She has finally received her well-deserved and long overdue crown. Yes, we are aware that this is only the Alternative Nobel Prize. Yes, we are aware that Condé is to receive about 97,000 euros, that is to say about 1/10 of what traditional recipient usually receives. Yes, we are aware that it took an unexpected twist in the context of the international impact of the Me Too movement for an opportunity to finally arise for Maryse Condé to be crowned. But some of us are brave, right? We do understand all of that. We even accept it, but we gladly accept the prize. People from the margins know only too well how to deal with the alternative. They know it, experience it, master and overcome it. Guadeloupe is in the margin. Black France is in the margin. So I want to be Maryse Condé for a moment. Nobel Prize, however characterized, Nobel Prize recipient. We now have two, after that of Toni Morrison. One from African America, the most recent from the Caribbean, the French Caribbean, the Creole Caribbean, the Black Caribbean. The voices of two women who have written from and about the Americas, addressed the Black Atlantic and the rest of the world. Morrison and Condé have written from the future, the new world, the Western modernity. But today I want to be Maryse Condé when she addressed the 2004 conference in Paris devoted to the African diaspora. She claimed and asserted then her right to speak not in English but in French, as she thought then if we truly wanted to practice this diaspora we constantly evoke, we need to accept its linguistic plurality and simply put an end to the hegemony of the English language. Following that logic, the issue of translation is crucial. It matters so much. So please, let me switch to French. This will be brief and painless. Je pense que la qualité à la fois la plus grande et la plus précieuse que l'on trouve dans le travail de Ta-Nehisi Coates est son côté passeur, traducteur. Ce qu'il parvient à faire véritablement, c'est briser l'élitisme scientifique, universitaire, académique que l'on retrouve dans le monde de la recherche. Coates parvient à rendre des pensées et idées complexes accessibles à un plus grand nombre. Cela est d'une grande importance car cela a pour effet de démocratiser la pensée complexe, précieuse et importante, en la faisant circuler davantage. Ce soir, je souhaite dire quelques mots à propos du chapitre de 8 ans au pouvoir, qui débute par les notes de la 6e année et se poursuit avec « Comme un Français ». Ce chapitre évoque le cours intensif que Ta-Nehisi Coates a suivi il y a quelques années dans le Vermont aux États-Unis, au sein de l'école française de Middlebury College. Ce cours, d'un banal classicisme, a duré 6 semaines, au cours desquelles l'auteur a pu se plonger corps et âme dans l'étude de la langue française et dans la culture de ce pays. Coates évoque tour à tour la ville de Paris et ses vieilles librairies, la gare de Strasbourg, de vieux films en français, le journal Le Monde, Radio France Internationale, la cuisine française, la littérature française et ses plumes les plus illustres. Parmi celles-ci, Baudelaire, Verlaine, Lamartine, Balzac et Rimbaud. Mais il est également question de la France élargie au monde francophone, que l'évocation de Karim Ouellet du Sénégal et du Canada et de l'évocation d'Haïti nous remémore. Au sujet d'Haïti, Coates écrit qu'à l'origine, je le cite, il ne voyait aucune raison d'apprendre il ne voyait aucune raison d'apprendre le français puisque c'était la langue des pilleurs d'Haïti. Fin de citation. On sent ici pointer l'inclinaison décidément panafricaine, l'intérêt pour la chose diasporique qui semble habiter la conscience et l'imaginaire de l'auteur. Et cela est heureux. Ainsi, on peut lire plus tard, je cite de nouveau, « Il m'a fallu d'abord être nationaliste avant de devenir humaniste. Je devais parvenir à comprendre que les Noirs n'étaient pas seulement les victimes de l'Occident, mais qu'ils furent aussi les architectes. Les philosophes ont commencé la phrase et Martin Luther King l'a terminée. Les plus grandes interprétations des plus grands hymnes de ce pays, les États-Unis, ont toutes été réalisées par des Noirs. Ray, Marvin, Whitney, Ray Charles, Marvin Gaye, Whitney Houston, bien entendu. Ce n'est ni une question de biologie, ni une erreur. C'est le cosmopolitisme nécessaire à un peuple qui voit l'Amérique depuis le sous-sol et qui, de ce fait, est contraint de recevoir ses enseignements, lorsqu'il peut les recevoir, en les absorbant, en les interprétant, en les affinant, en les réinventant. Fin de citation. De telles lignes, parce qu'elles font montre d'une compréhension si profonde, si sophistiquée de la marge, dans ce qu'elle détruit et produit, tout cela de manière simultanée. De telles lignes donnent envie de lire un traitement plus approfondi de la culture et de l'histoire française que Coates a acquis avec tant de délectation dans le Vermont. À la lecture, ce que l'on désire, c'est le récit alternatif de cette histoire et de cette culture française dispensée dans le Vermont à Middlebury College. En effet, que peut-on dire des années éthiopiennes du poète de la fulgurance qu'était Rimbaud ? Que peut-on dire d'une Jeanne Duval, la compagne créole de Charles Baudelaire, qui lui a inspiré un peu de la grande poésie des Fleurs du Mal et a posé pour le tableau La Dame à l'éventail de Manet en 1862 ? Que peut-on dire du personnage d'un des romans de Balzac, le Monumental, qui part faire fortune dans les colonies ? Il y aurait tant à dire. On aurait tort de blâmer Ta-Nehisi à ce sujet. Peut-être la tâche incombe-t-elle à ceux qui regardent la France depuis le sous-sol. Les gens, les communautés de la marge. La tâche incombe en vérité à ceux qui ne sont pas entièrement convaincus que, et je cite une nouvelle fois Coates, « Parfois vous aurez besoin des outils du maître pour démanteler sa maison ». Fin de citation. Mais dans un cas comme dans l'autre, il faudra parler, écrire, communiquer, comprendre et traduire. Le plus clairement possible, de la manière la plus belle et la plus complète, donc la plus juste qui soit. Black Lives Matter. It's a shame we had to again assert and repeat this. Black experiences and subjectivities matter. Black friends matters. Let's translate and further this conversation across the Atlantic, across the world, across time and space. In diaspora, forever. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Maboula. Merci beaucoup. I'm going to open the floor to questions now. And I hate to be a disciplinarian, but I'll do it. So please, when you're called on, really ask a question. don't make a speech, and try to keep the preamble to your question short, because I will interrupt you to ask you to get to the point. So, first question.
Thank you so much for the conversation. I have a question that's actually an invitation to share a little bit more about what you're talking about, which is a key term. And the key term is power. When you talk about 8 years in power, and when you talk about the limitations of Barack Obama and his vision for whatever structural reasons that you've really clearly laid out, what does power mean to you? And what would power look like if it were inhabited in a way that was effectual, either under Barack Obama or any other, not even black president, but somebody who was able to marshal power towards change? So I guess there's no preamble. My question is really about, when we talk about being 8 years in power, what did that mean? What would it mean? What is, can you just talk about what the term is as you would love it to be seen or inhabited?
Well, that's a big question. Well, I think power, quite simply, is the ability to, at least when you talk about in the world of politics, it's the ability to alter the world according, to either the wants of you yourself or the community in which you represent or the group in which you represent. I think Trump is doing that quite well right now. But that's because he stands in a very, very long and old tradition of power in this country. I think one of the difficult things about America, when you talk about this, that makes it very, very difficult is, well, I'll speak in terms of like incomes, okay? So it's no secret that in America, white people have greater income than black people. If you equalize that right now, it still wouldn't actually be power for black people, because white people would have more wealth, which is to say they would have more years of drawing income, not just personally, but also, from ancestors who themselves drew incomes that were higher than black people over a period of time. If you equalized every black and white person in America according to the lines of wealth, by which, people would actually have some sort of, reserve, not just what they brought in, through a salary or however you want to do it, it still wouldn't quite be equal. Because in America, white people don't just have personal wealth, they have institutional wealth. They have wealth that, that's in, relationships. They have wealth that's, in banks. They have wealth that, is in churches. The entire social relation is organized around it. For instance, that would do nothing to alter the fact that schools in one district look very different than schools in another district. That's what I mean by institutions. That would do nothing to alter the fact that the likelihood of, say, someone having a contact that would allow my son to get into an Ivy League university versus someone else's son of a different color would be very, very different. I say all that to say that it's difficult to imagine. Well, it's not difficult to imagine. It's difficult to imagine the kind of power that would bring any sort of equality to America for black people without, and this is not a conclusion I come to lightly, but without some sort of mass fundamental change. Because it would represent the sort of power that would have to address the generational question, which is the accumulation of power over years, not just by you personally, but by your grandparents, great-grandparents, and how it's handed down largely across racial lines, because that's how families are formed in America. It would have to address the very personal power that you continue to draw to this very day through your suite of privileges. And it would have to address these broader institutional questions that have been fed by these folks who have ancestral power. When you start talking like that, you start talking about a fundamental reordering of the society itself. Because in order to equalize, you will have to strip somebody else of power. So will we 8 years of power? Well, I mean, I don't mean to be brusque, but it is not a title that is supposed to be taken literally. One does not like listen to Thomas Miller making that cry at that time and then saying, hey, but most South Carolinians weren't in the House of Representatives like you were. I understand what he meant. It was a poetic sort of statement. I like poetry. So I think one has to be just a little bit generous with book titles. It wasn't a literal war between the stars, even though we call it Star Wars. It's not literally, the stars fighting each other. So I'm just pleading for that sort of charity.
Wait for the mic. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I've got a very loud voice. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask a question about translation, and not translation linguistically, but translation in terms of experiences. We had a reference to diaspora. When I was reading your book, Between the World and Me, I remember at the very end thinking, I was feeling very much the experience that you described resonated. I mean, I'm from London, I'm from Nigeria, and I live in France, but it was very much resonating with my understanding of my own experience, okay? So even though I haven't grown up with a slave history in the same way as the one you describe, the experience of being a colonial product and enslavement being part of that colonial experience meant that I felt your account translates very well. And somehow reading that book in France, I did read it in English, but it was very, very popular, had a sense in a French audience that there was that's over there, that's America, that's an American experience that doesn't quite translate. I just want your reflections on that translation, to what extent, from what you've heard and and how you've experienced the way the book's been received, what you think about that, how it translates question.
I mean, I hope it translates. That's not really for me to say in some respects. It would put me in a very, very awkward position to say, well, hey, I think it translates great. I mean, that's I think more for the reader to say. I will say something about, your point, that's over there thing. I think that people who, when they have committed crimes against other groups, often look for ways to distract and change the subject. I've said this before, we do this in America, where one of the biggest sticks that people use to smack black people is they say, well, look how well Caribbean immigrants do when they get here. Look how well African immigrants do here. This proves that this is not, a racist society. Here's a group of black people that can, that can succeed. That's very easy to say, right? To say nothing about the self-selection of what it means to be an immigrant in the first place, right? And how that, immigrants should never be used as any sort of measurement of a broad population of people. But more importantly, the framing of the question itself reflects a desire to get away from the crime one has committed, to find some sort of escape valve. And so it wouldn't particularly shock me if there were people who read the book here and while admiring the book tried to use it as an escape valve. Only because, I would suspect that that's what people in power do all the time. Try to find some way to change the subject without looking like they're changing the subject. To the extent that, I can argue for the prevention, that, I most certainly would. I am not interested in being, any sort of tool to be used to tell black French people how good they have it, or Arab French people how good they have it. I certainly didn't write the book, with that intention. I'm here largely, well, not largely to refute that notion, but, certainly with the hope that, that there's something, to be gained out of it, besides that.
Who has the mic?
Yep. Hi, everyone. There's things that you both have said, and the young lady, what's your name?
Maboula.
Maboula. She said that I find really interesting because she talked about margins, about black people being in the margins, and I don't know, it brought me a thought. I'm thinking that's almost an illusion, because we are all here. We flocked to around your work, and when Black people produce music, art, and everything, people come around them, and I feel like the margin thing is is a narrative that is almost an illusion, and that deserve us, because I think we are in the center. I think we are actually in the center, and then whiteness wannabe whites are in the margins, and they're the one who steps inside and then take and then go. And I wonder if the fact of thinking that blackness is in the margins and not in the center of the culture, etc., is not in disservice of the cause. And
Maboula, you want to answer? Okay. You got it?
2 mics. I'm going to answer twice. Je vais parler en français. Vous êtes française? D'accord. Et il y a un traducteur. De ce que j'ai compris de ce que vous avez dit et de ce que vous avez compris de ce que j'ai dit précédemment, j'ai l'impression que l'illusion serait plutôt de considérer que, alors on a des problèmes pour traduire même ce terme en français, que les Noirs, que cette identité noire se trouve au centre. Ça, c'est l'illusion. Ça, c'est ce qu'on voudrait, ça, c'est le désir. La réalité, je pense qu'il y a une histoire, il y a des arts, il y a, je ne sais pas, de la sociologie, il y a de l'économie, il y a de la politique, il y a de la géopolitique qui, de fait, place et a placé, pas depuis le début de l'humanité, mais en tout cas depuis quelques siècles, les populations qui apparaissent comme noires, qui sont comprises comme noires, qui ont été fabriquées comme noires. Et là, on vient de parler ce soir du fait que tout ça, c'était fluctuant. Malheureusement, de fait, sont aux marges. Sont aux marges. Et c'est pour ça que j'ai utilisé l'exemple de Maryse Condé, qui a gagné un prix Nobel et qui a gagné un prix Nobel alternatif. C'est ce qu'on dit. Et même, j'ai manqué d'élégance en parlant de la somme d'argent qui est allouée à ce prix, qui est 97 000 €, parce que l'argent, ça compte. Normalement, c'est près d'1 million d'euros. Donc, bien sûr que c'est un prix Nobel qui va compter pour toutes les personnes qui aiment l'écriture de Maryse Condé, qui enseignent Maryse Condé, qui la lisent. Mais dans les faits, est-ce que quand il y aura une liste au final des récipiendaires du prix Nobel, est-ce qu'elle sera sur cette liste? C'est ça la marge. Et donc la marge, ça ne veut pas dire qu'on ne compte pas. Hein. Et je comprends, enfin j'espère que je comprends ce que vous avez dit sur l'identité noire qui serait au centre des préoccupations de l'identité blanche ou de la suprématie blanche. Ça, c'est vrai. C'est comme si c'était son opposé constitutif. Là, je suis d'accord. Maintenant, quand vous regardez le monde tel qu'il existe, et j'ai parlé de l'ère moderne, les Noirs, vous pouvez dire les pauvres, vous pouvez dire les non-hétérosexuels, enfin, toutes les catégories qui ont été créées ne sont pas au centre. Ne sont pas au centre. Voilà, c'est ce que je voulais dire. Et je pense que c'est pour ça que M. Coates m'a laissé la parole. Je pense que le désir, on voudrait que ce soit le centre, et ça peut être le centre dans quelques espaces particuliers, mais ce n'est pas le centre. Ce n'est pas le centre. Sinon, on ne serait pas en train de publier des livres et de traduire des livres qui s'appellent 8 ans au pouvoir. 8 ans au pouvoir. Ça fait deux mandats présidentiels pour un pays qui est né en 1776. On ne peut pas parler d'un président qui s'appelle Barack Obama, qui était le 44e président des États-Unis, et sur 45, il y en a 44 qui n'étaient pas de couleur. C'est ça la marge, à mes yeux. Voilà.
Who has the mic?
At the risk of digging into this conceit where you're supposed to answer every question that we have about Thank you. So I was just going to apologize for the fact that I'm about to ask you a question that reflects this idea we have that you're meant to have the answers to everything about everything. But I am going to do it. I'm going to ask you a how-to question about child rearing. But
I don't know.
No, well, you might have an idea.
Bonne chance.
Ok, moi je vais essayer quand même simply to ask how you navigate being in a position now, certainly still in the margins to some extent, but nevertheless in a position of some power and influence and privilege, and having a child who has the benefit of all those things, and who would potentially have the option of not suffering many of the things you write about, talk about, and think about. How do you navigate his reality with the reality that you want him to understand?
I mean, I feel like I could ask you that. I really do, because if you have any answers at all to that, please tell me. And I'm not, listen, I'm not being sarcastic here. You have to understand, it's been, so what? Between the World and Me came out in 2015. This is extremely new. This has not been my life. It is because my answer to that is pretty simple. You make him suffer. But I don't know that that's actually the correct, it's just what I know. You know what I mean? It's just like.
Is that what you're doing?
Kinda. I mean, I don't want to embarrass him. You know what I mean? And I don't want to embarrass his mom, but it kinda, sorta. I mean, because that's really all okay, here's what I think, or here's what I fear. I fear people who, like when I talk about whiteness, over and over again, I just go back to this idea that it is not about anybody's physicality, but it's about power, and it's about the assumptions that people make when they're used to power. All of those things I outlined before: generational wealth, generational, income across generations, wealth in institutions. Well, there's some attitudes that come with all of that, right? Not out of genealogy, but out of the fact of, you know what I mean, of what power is. Obviously, with relatively little amount of power I have compared to that, it is not the same, but it's significantly more than what I was raised with, and significantly more than what I had before. And I deeply, deeply fear raising a kid that is any way either accustomed to that or believes that that's somehow his right. It's a deep, incredible. I just feel the boy getting lost more than anything. And I'm not saying he's gonna, I'm not saying that, but like when I thought about this over the years, and when I thought about it after, everything that came after Between the World and Me, I just didn't want him to get lost. It is so easy in America to completely opt out, to opt into whiteness totally. Just say, you know what? I'm done with y'all. I'm over here. I got mine. You got yours to get. I'm about to get in trouble, Kenyatta. So I saw, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. I'm just going to be real. I'm just going to say it because this has been haunting me. Like, I actually think this is important, man. Susan Rice, who used to, was a national security advisor, I believe, for Barack Obama. She has this son, and her son is at Stanford. And he is a rabid Trump supporter. Rabid. Like, you literally can Google it right now. You'll see it will horrify you, the sort of things he says. And I mean, here's somebody, you have a situation where you have a child, and that child is like raised around somebody that was in the first administration of the first black president. And he grows up to support a guy with criminal allegations against him who goes around chanting to lock women up. That's my nightmare. That's my nightmare. Now, there are levels to this, right? Like, that's the most extreme. Like, I look at that, and me and Soumahoro would have, we would have a serious break. Like, we might be street fighting at that point, you know what I mean? But there are levels, There are levels to, where you can just say, you know what, I don't want, any of the hardship. I don't want any of the struggle, because there are points in your life where you really need that, regardless of, wealth or anything like that. So The answer to your question is I really don't know. I'm serious. Like maybe, you have something to tell me about that, because it is an extremely new. I know how to raise kids in absence of resources, which is what I did for most of my son's life. I know how to do. I've mastered that. I can talk to you all day and long about not having enough and then figuring it out. You know what I mean? But when you have more than what you thought you ever would, I mean, that's something else.
Next question, yes, in the back there.
Thank you. So this is a question that I've been racking my brain for the last couple of years, and am having a really hard time trying to reconcile. So my question, to really kind of sum it up, is how do we maintain and build democratic institutions while also radically dismantling white supremacy and the structural racism that built these institutions? Because democracy is how we're going to, well, theoretically, liberate people to rise up and have power. At the same time, the institutions that people are using to do that were built on white supremacy. So this is something, I don't know, it's kind of a big question. I don't expect like an easy, clear answer, but it's something that I'm putting out there because I can't seem to crack this one. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the crazy thing is, I guess this is the further twist on the Edmund Morgan thesis that I advanced before, is that there really is not democracy in America. If you really had one person, one vote, maybe white supremacy would still be durable, maybe it would not. I don't know. But I know that we don't have it right now. And I know that the institution of white supremacy has actually always relied on anti-democratic means. There was nothing democratic about the Civil War, for instance. I'm talking about, like, it's not like they took a popular vote in South Carolina. Because had they taken a popular vote in South Carolina, there wouldn't have been no Civil War, because most of the people in South Carolina were black. So it's not like the Civil War was a democratic, war in and of itself. It's a deeply, regressive, reactionary, anti-democratic war in and of itself. Redemption was not imposed by democratic means. As I said earlier, it was imposed by, at the point of the rifle. And right now, there's nothing democratic about the election of Donald Trump. Lost the vote by 3 million. The attempt, by a Senate, the successful attempt, in fact, by a Senate that does not represent the majority of Americans to deny, Barack Obama the right to appoint a Supreme Court judge. Wasn't nothing democratic about that at all. Wasn't nothing democratic about George Bush's first term and the fact that he was president, at the moment that 9/11 happened, crucial moment in our history. And we had a president who was not elected democratically in the White House at that point. So it may well be that your question answers itself, by which I mean, the way to dismantle it is in fact to fight for, more democratic, processes in the country. But it may well be that it doesn't answer itself either. Who knows? Who ultimately knows? I think, we're all, sort of groping and struggling, in the dark. But if I had a direction to go in, I would certainly pick the direction of empowering more people. In a country that claims to be a democracy.
Well, would getting rid of the Electoral College be a good start?
Of course.
Yeah. Yes, in the back there. Yes, you. Yeah. A mic.
Hi. I read earlier this year your article, I'm Not Black, I'm Kanye. As you know, he just had another trip to, I guess his first trip to the White House. So I just wanted to know, what was your thoughts on that? And do you think that black people can genuinely make requests of Trump, or is that a futile attempt?
You can genuinely make a request. I also think it's a futile attempt, in general. If you're making it on behalf of, any sort of, any interest of black people, I think it's a futile attempt. I actually sort of regret writing that essay, because I think I took Kanye a little more seriously than he deserved. By which I mean, I don't think what is happening right now is the result. Well, and I guess this was kind of in the essay. So maybe I don't regret it. I think what's important, and yeah, as I'm thinking about it, I was trying even to do this when I wrote the essay. I didn't want to do a bash Kanye essay, right? And I tried really hard not to do that because I don't think Kanye is completely in control of his faculties right now. And I think he's surrounded by people who have no real interest, or perhaps no real power, I don't know which it is, to help him get control of those faculties. When you watch him, at that press conference, that, put aside what you think of, what he's actually saying. It's almost wrong to try to impose a coherent ideology on it. I think what's sad is his family, or I guess his adopted or married into family, is allowing him to, effectively be pimped out by people that do not care about him. A buddy of mine said this to me the other day. If Kanye was making the kind of speech that he made in the White House, where was talking about, say, killing all white people, right? Like, he would be locked up. He would be locked up immediately. If he was making that sort of speech and not even going that far. But Obama was the president. And Obama had that happen in the White House. God knows what would happen to Kanye. But it's a very sad situation when, one who is clearly struggling with mental illness, and then on top of that, struggling with all of the, difficult to manage things that, celebrity brings, even though he courts it, is then allowed to be, empowered, as some sort of voice, and then, allowed to be used. I just don't think he got anybody that's capable of caring about him around him. It's quite evident. No friend would allow me to, say, as I'm here right now, like make a speech like Kanye is making. My brother, my wife are right here in the front row. Hey, poor man, what were you doing? What was going on up there? Like, they would have, it would be a conversation. Do you know what I mean? And it would be very different. Well, I might not get to talk again. That actually might be. But you see, you need people like that in your life. You know what I mean? If you're just out there and you're kind of alone and all of the people around you are either making money off of you or getting something off of you, or, you know what I mean, somehow not in the business of reinforcing your health, you can do a lot of crazy things and a lot of damage to yourself. And I feel like right now what we're watching, it's like, you see a car crash, right? But it's like happening in slow motion. I've with much regret, I actually seen this happen with other people. I think about like ODB who, overdosed on drugs. I saw him at a press conference in a room full of reporters right after he had gotten out of prison. And, he was announcing that he was going to a different music label. And he was clearly not in his right mind. Like, he needed to be like hospitalized somewhere. He was clearly, out of it. And I think like 8 months after I saw him there, like, he was dead. He was dead. And so it's like all of these people gawking right now, sort of laughing and making jokes like mental health is something to play with. And, when should something awful ever happen to Kanye, be the first people to jump up and down, talk about how much they loved Kanye. But it's like a weak love. You know what I mean? It's not a real love. It's not a tough love. It's not a love that really requires you to actually do anything. So, I feel deep sadness watching him.
In the second row here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your speech and everything. The question I want to ask is about democracy. I'm not talking about the Republicans, the Democrats, and the system. I'm talking about money in American democracy. Could somebody who is a nobody, who is not a millionaire, if not a billionaire, could anybody like that come to power now? Because when you think of what democracy used to be, it was people who knew each other, you'd voted for the right person to do the right thing for the community. And right now, especially the last primaries, when I looked at the Republicans, everybody had millions. In France, no candidate is allowed to spend more than X euros. And in America, the first thing you do is to have a big chest. Do you think that is relevant? And if it is, up to how much? And Is there a solution to that?
No, to answer your first question, I don't think that's possible. But, I do have to ask whether it's possible here in France, even with those restrictions. In other words, your original question was, given the amount of money that's required in America, is it possible from somebody who, maybe has some good ideas, good-hearted, et cetera, but is not, well-connected, doesn't have millions, to actually competitively, run, say, sort of, race of national importance, i.e. the presidency? And I guess my question is, even with the restrictions here, is that possible here in France? Do the chief executives of France tend to be more wealthy than the people they represent relatively, for instance?
I think on lower levels, you still have people, I think, who didn't really go to the best universities. You don't have to be really, really rich. I mean, in America, you have to be a millionaire at least, or at least with every election, I have the impression people are getting richer and richer. And when you hear how much a Senate race costs, it's just impossible for anybody who doesn't have a name or money.
I'd agree about it. That's certainly a accurate assessment of America, definitely.
Yes.
Enfin. Sorry, I have been raising my hand like this, as my friend Mark can say, and I'll try not to make a speech or a long preamble, but one just observation. I feel like tonight I understand how it must maybe feel to be a black woman when I desperately want to speak and I feel like marginalized, that, oh no, I'm not getting the mic and I have this voice and I want to sit.
There's been lots of hands raised. Apologies, but there's been lots of hands raised.
That's not good to say. Just to say, it's good for once that we have a very open dialogue. That was a Kanye moment. Okay, Mark, my friend over there, is going to drag me off the stage. It's my moment. Okay, now the real question. Thank you for your speech. Here's the actual question I had, which is coming back to your book, which I admit I haven't read yet, but listening to it. Oh no, people are so, whoa, that is the moment of the night. If you got it on Twitter, YouTube, put it up, go viral, you got it. Okay, what I wanted to say is, I find it very interesting, and it had a lot of ideas of this, your speech, and I've been thinking, and I don't know if I heard it from you or recycled from you or from another great thinker, that part of the explanation for the Trump phenomenon is the change in relative social position. You think often of the white working class, that yes, they were always economically disadvantaged compared to the landowners, but they were ahead of the African American above in the social ladder. And still on the whole, that's true. When you have this mass incarceration, this is getting to a question, but you have some skyrocket examples like Barack Obama that went up to the top, and you could think even for wealthy white people, they see that and their own sense of being the top of the pyramid is now questioned and shaken because you have these of Barack Obama, of Hillary Clinton, of groups that used to be more, even further underneath them than they are today. My question is that a way to close the circle, is that the term, to connect the Bernie bros and the ones who understand to say, actually it is about our economic disadvantage, class, greater inequality, globalization, that it's because their own position is actually stagnated materially, but also that their social position relative to those of other groups has changed. So that I just love to hear your thoughts about that. And I apologize for anyone in the room who was offended. That was a bad joke on my part, and I really apologize.
But not a bad question. I think actually you hit on something. I think there's something to the notion that everybody talks a lot about how proud black people felt, and I guess large numbers of non-black people felt also about, the fact of a first black president. And I think that feeling was sincere and genuinely felt, but what nobody really talks about is there were obviously large numbers of Americans that felt a little different about the fact of a first black president. And that has effects, and that has great power, and that's true in terms of its, symbolism across, pop culture. We certainly live in an era where there are many, many, many more black people who occupy the media landscape. Where you have, huge stars like a LeBron James, or, even the fact that Kanye West is even relevant right now. A Kendrick Lamar. It's a very different world, a movie like Black Panther. And so, yeah, I think there's some degree of status anxiety. But I don't think the problem is I don't think that actually will close the circle, because that status anxiety is still premised on white supremacy. Because the notion is that somehow I have a right to that place, within, the cultural hierarchy, within the hierarchy of symbols, which you have no right to at all. Any, sort of domination that white people ever had over that in the first place was always based on violence and always illegitimate, to begin with. So while I think your analysis is correct, one cannot, at the same time, think in a non-racist, non-white supremacist manner and express any sort of sympathy towards that sort of anxiety. That's life. You don't get to feel comfortable everywhere. That's life. Sometimes it may take a little while to get to your question. That's life. That's what we all have to go through. You know what I mean? That's a very, very normal thing. And I think those of us who are used to it are much less likely to have anxiety about it. And the fact that one now must have anxiety about it, well, welcome to life with the rest of us down here,
Who has the mic? Whoever has the mic, I didn't pass out the mics. Yeah, okay, thank you.
J'ai une question, par contre, elle est en français. Ok. Est-ce que vous avez une idée de comment on peut éradiquer le racisme institutionnel dans un pays où on refuse de reconnaître la race?
So I think this applies to the question just for here in France, they don't, for those who do not know, and this was a new one on me, France does not recognize race. It doesn't have a census like we do in America, where they count percentages and say, X number of black people, check your race. I believe it's constitutional here in France. Yes. Okay, so in the Constitution there's this notion that you can't recognize race at all. So this presents great difficulty at quantifying and documenting, racism. Now, the thing you have to, I think, understand is the invention of checking off race or census or counting race in America was not invented to make it easier for black people to prove that there was racism. In fact, it actually was a tool that was supposed to be used against us. It just so happened that black people and, allies of black people and, other, folks, right-minded folks, figured out how to use that system, to their advantage. Such to the extent that there are now people who don't want to count anymore. I say that to say that I just, first of all, don't want to give America any credit for the fact of recognition. It only recognized race as a way to, better enforce racism. That was the whole point. So what I would think about, and again, you guys would know this better than me, but what I would immediately think about is what within the system that France has right now could one use and leverage to make it susceptible in the same way. Do you know what I mean? We had a tool, there was a way of doing things, a way that the country did things, and they used it mostly as a way to segregate us. That was the point. And then probably as a result of, certain historical developments that allow people to have, certain amounts of power, we figured out that we could actually use those numbers actually to help ourselves. Is there some way to flip this concept of racelessness? I don't know. I don't know. I don't live here. But I do think in terms of immediate steps, it's really, really difficult. And well, you guys have rewritten the Constitution several times. So maybe I could just say you guys could just have a new Constitution. You know what I mean? You could literally just change the Constitution. We haven't had, a new one since our first one. You know, like that's a much more difficult job in America than it is in France. So maybe you just need to rewrite the Constitution. I don't know. But I know one thing that I think about in this matter is the counting of race actually, and we're gonna have to figure this out again in America, actually sometimes gets in the way because it's not the race that's the problem, it's the instances of racism. So it's not so much being black, but it's the fact of things that people do to you because that's what they consider you to be. So after 9/11, we had, for instance, Sikhs, you know what I mean, who were suffering hate crimes, even though those were effectively anti-Muslim crimes. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like the act, you know, was the real thing. I'm fumbling there because I just don't know the context. You know, I think it's a very, very difficult, you know, problem and a very, very difficult, you know, question, but an interesting one.
Who has the mic?
Donc j'ai deux questions, mais en français. Donc premièrement, est-ce que le président Obama a lu votre livre?
Comment?
Est-ce que le président Obama a lu? Did Barack Obama read your book?
Oui, he did. So he asked did he read? So he read Between the World and Me. He's very kind. And I heard he read We Were 8 Years in Power.
Ok, donc la deuxième question, donc bon, est-ce qu'il a eu l'occasion de combattre la suprématie blanche pendant ses 2 mandats? Parce que j'ai cru comprendre qu'il a eu l'occasion de commencer, mais malheureusement il était contraint d'arrêter. Est-ce que vous pouvez m'en dire un peu plus à ce propos?
That one I missed.
Non, mais
Did Barack Obama have the occasion to combat white supremacy in the White House? Or did he do it, or did he drop the ball? I think might be one way of putting what you said.
Yeah, I mean, I think he... I think the first thing you have to ask yourself is what kind of black person has the possibility of becoming president of the United States? I can't with my politics be president of the United States. It goes back to that quote you had earlier. This notion that it was his insight about white people that allowed him to be president, but that was the thing that ultimately actually hurt him the most. So I think his politics going in would be a little different. You know what I mean? I think like the things that he would ask for, he would never use the phrase white supremacy, and then it's like that. He would never, first of all, describe the problem in that way. You know, he just wouldn't. So on the one hand, I think he could have done more. You know what I mean? On the other hand, I think the institution of the presidency, and a black president specifically, is automatically limited because of the sheer number, the sheer numbers of who has to elect that president, in the first place. Having said that, I do think there's a huge difference in terms of how he, approached like questions of police brutality in the cities. Like, there's a difference between, say, Eric Holder, who is our, thank you, man, United States Attorney, and Jeff Sessions, who is our United States Attorney right now. There's going to be a difference around voting rights. There's going to be a difference around police brutality. It's not going to be the same thing, So I think not in the way that I would have liked or I would have seen necessarily, but these things do matter. As a historian who I think about a lot, Barbara Ramsby, out in Chicago, and she was, she talks about electoral politics. And she says one of the things that radicals often say is, well, I got to vote for this person, but they're just the lesser of two evils. And she says, yes, but I'm in favor of less evil. And so often that's what, it comes down to, particularly in our presidential elections. It's less evil. The other piece she adds to that is, your politics don't end there. They don't end at the voting booth. It's not just, I vote for Hillary or I vote for Barack and then I go home. We almost put too much pressure on that singular vote.
Thank you very much for your answer.
just going to stand up so you can see me better. I'm Joseph, and I hope this question isn't similar to the one that was asked before about a sort of colorblind society, but as an African American from North Carolina, it's sort of hard for me to understand the concept of a so-called colorblind society. My question for you is, what do you believe are the pros and cons of a so-called society, and do you believe it's possible to truly be systematically considered equal and accepted as a person of color in such a society? If it's the same sort of question, then I have another one prepared, if so.
No, I guess I should honestly say, and you know, I feel deeply unqualified to answer that question. I lived in France for a year. You know what I mean? My sense from my black French friends is that it's not, you know, it is kind of a wash, you know, ultimately. But I just don't feel like I have the same, you know, like when I talk about America, I have a particular lived experience. I've studied it, I've thought about it for a long time. I've been thinking about it all my life. And I'm uncomfortable speaking about France in that way, because I just don't have the same reservoir.
I have another question about the United States. Okay, I had one prepared just in case. So, because you said that before, so I figured. So today is the 50th anniversary of the protests in the Mexico City Olympics in 1968, and I was wondering, using Colin Kaepernick and more recently Serena Williams as an example, what do you think the role of black athletes is today in using their platform to address systematic injustice and gender equality in and outside of sports?
Yeah, I think. Well, you know, I came up in the 90s when athletes didn't say anything, you know. I think that quote from Michael Jordan about Republicans biases, I think it's like apocryphal. I don't think he actually said that. Nevertheless, you know, you just didn't look to Jordan to make any sort of political stand. So, you know, I'm 43, and so I've seen a generation of relatively apolitical athletes or athletes who, you know, didn't make open statements about their politics. And so to see like an era of, you know, like Colin Kaepernick, the support he got, Eric Reed, you know, the number of players across the league that really supported him, to see, you know, LeBron James being open about it, Steph Curry being, you know, open about it. I mean, it's heartening. You know, it offers, you know, inspiration. It's a beautiful thing to see.
Lauren, how are we doing on time?
9:20.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question and then head into the.
Okay. All the way in the back there, the young woman with glasses.
Hi. My question for you is regarding going back to the media coverage you touched on earlier. I think I've just read my 8,000th story in the New York Times about the economic anxiety of Trump voters in the South, and it seems like
that was a John Judas piece. I'm sorry? Was it John Judas's piece? Yeah.
Yes, among many, many others. And we see, regardless, it's the liberal media, but among the people who write for our sort of elite media institutions, regardless of their political leanings, there does seem to be an interest in maintaining this fiction that the white people who voted for Trump did so because they were worried about globalization, because they were worried about economics, and not because of any sort of tendencies towards racism, misogyny, any of the ugly undercurrents that we know run through society. Do you think that will ever change? Will we ever see the narrative change?
Well, you know, it's a problem with our politics and the way we consider it. There was, I guess, a piece that came out, a report that came out on global warming maybe about a week ago, and you know, it predicted dire consequences. And I can remember only 2 or 3. I feel like this argument came up a couple times, you know, over the past 2 or 3 years, wherein among scientists and science journalists, there was the question of whether one should speak directly and clearly and say, listen, we are not doing nearly enough, and even if we started right now, you know, we're gonna get hurt really, really badly, like it's emergency time. And folks who said speaking in that sort of way would kill hope. You know, you get this word hope, people need to feel like hope, yes we can, humans can do it, as you can tell, I'm not particularly a fan of that. But you know, the problem is, I think, I guess if I would, you know, defending, you know, that part that makes people do that, they want a workable politics that they think some amount of hope can be invested in. If it's true that large numbers, as I think it is, you know, large numbers, a critical mass of Americans elected Donald Trump out of reasons of historical and deeply rooted white supremacy, I mean, you can't just elect a new president off of that, because you might elect a new president, but the problem is you have a portion of your country that's deeply infected with something. It forces you up against that whole idea of the people being good. What folks want is they want a kind of workable politics, a workable history, a workable electorate, where they can say, hey, go do this, hey, you might have got it wrong here, but if we just do X, Y, and Z, and there's hope in that. But I think the notion that white supremacy is deeply rooted, and so deeply rooted that it led you to this current catastrophe, is just so, it is as mind-boggling as we probably won't prevent global warming. Do you understand? Because you have to then start to think about like the great disasters that will befall you and your grandchildren, and people don't want to do that. Yeah. They don't want to do that. My concern in that vein is when you invent these kind of false arguments, you know what I mean? When you are effectively a climate change denialist on the questions of race and racism in the history, there are a whole suite of questions that come after that you don't even get to ask. Because you're stuck in this place of needing to be a cheerleader, for people, instead of, talking to people straight, and letting them know. It's like, I think about like, listen, if I'm going to the doctor to get a diagnosis, man, tell me what's wrong. Don't not tell me because you need me to feel hopeful. I mean, that would be absurd. Here you're dying of cancer. Well, we won't tell him he's dying of cancer because we need to keep his spirits up. No, tell me what's going on. I need to know. And then I have the right to make preparations accordingly. But we don't, I don't know. I think large numbers of the press are deeply invested in this notion, sometimes personally. I mean, it's their cousins that voted for Trump. Who wants to go to Thanksgiving dinner and look at half your family and say, my God, they put a white supremacist in office? You know what I mean? Much better to think, oh, they made a mistake. That's much easier to deal with. So I think it's a deeply tragic phenomenon. I don't anticipate it changing really anytime soon.
Yes, young man there. Yep.
Thank you. I had the good fortune of reading The Case for Reparations with a group of incarcerated men in Jessup Correctional Facility, and I believe you opened the piece talking about the bill that's often put forth that would analyze what a final tally might come to. And it seems some of the, I think, unfair criticism I've heard about your work is the idea of whiteness as a talisman. I happen to have grown up in Georgia, not far from Stone Mountain, which, for people who don't know, it's the Confederate Mount Rushmore. And I'm interested in your perspective as a writer on how to break talisman, but also thinking about some of the references you've made to Germany's ability to look at some of the very deep-seated white supremacy in their history and overcome it, or the wrestlings with it. And so I just wondered if you might talk a little bit about the wrestling with symbolism, if something like this bill that assesses a final toll or some other type of peace and reconciliation is the vision, your literary vision or your political vision for something that might approach this idea, at least in its symbols, whether it's the Confederate monuments in Louisiana or Stone Mountain or wherever they may be.
Let me just interject that will be the last question from the audience. So
just to be clear, and I think I said this in the piece, when I talk about representation, I am talking about money. And sometimes I think that piece is read as though I'm not, I don't know why, but as though like I'm, talking about a prayer meeting or something. I'm not talking about a prayer meeting, I'm talking about money. Having said that, symbols are very important, So I think it works like this, you have a set of politics and policies that are possible. The question of what policies and politics are possible, I think, are very much bounded by the narratives that you tell about the country, the way you tell history, by the symbols. So, for example, if you don't believe black people are human beings, if you have, a kind of theater, a mass media that replays to other people the idea that black people aren't human beings. If you think that when black people given, the chance to govern, like ate fried chicken in the legislature, and didn't wear shoes, if that's what you think, that will necessarily affect what you think is actually possible in terms of, laws and legislation. So I actually think, oftentimes it's said, well, Barack Obama's presidency, was only a symbolic victory. And I'm like, only? Symbolic victories matter very, very much. They are not victories without, material consequence. These people who are fighting right now to keep up Confederate monuments across America, they know this very well. They're not like, oh, take that Robert E. Lee statue down. It's only a symbolic victory. They're standing in front of it, because they understand that when you change who's heroic, when you change what the society should model itself after, then the society can then start thinking about different policies, because the policies actually reflect that. America is not, does not suffer from white supremacy, solely, on the basis of money and taking things from people. When people want to take things from other people, they make up reasons. I always think about, Damani, you'll love this. I think about like when I was a kid, right? And, everybody in my neighborhood used to get jumped, right? And when you got jumped and the kids was ready to, to throw down, they couldn't just say, oh, we're ready to beat the hell out of somebody, so we're going to do this to you. They would always have to make up some excuse. You was messing with my cousin. That's the dude that was talking about me last week. And you might not know that person from Adam, but they had to justify their aggression towards you. White supremacy always has to justify its aggression towards black people. It's always making up excuses. It's always making up reasons, and those are contained in the symbols around us. And so it's very, very important to assault those symbols that dehumanize black people, because from the symbols, people then derive the legislation that in turn dehumanizes black people. And then they put up more symbols that reinforce that, and so on. So the narrative has to, be disruptive. And so I think this notion that we can immediately go to policy, without talking about what bounds those policies, I think we will always be limited. So whatever critique I have of Barack Obama, and I do, I have quite a bit, the fact that there are little white kids in America today whose first vision of what it means to be president will be somebody black is as tremendous and close to as significant as the fact that when I was a little kid in America, what it meant was for somebody to be white. That's significant. It bounds what you think is possible. So I think like this notion that it's either or, it's either the symbolic or the material, or in talking about the symbolic, we're trying to avoid a discussion of the material. I think is deeply untrue. I think you actually need both. I don't think you can get to, the material without the symbolic, and I think the people who are defending the symbolic know that very well.
Well, let me just say I urge everyone to get their hands on this book. We could go on and on, but one thing we didn't get to talk about, Ta-Nehisi, is how much you write about writing in the book. And that, for me as a practitioner, is really fascinating. And I think sometimes, with all the talk of politics, people forget what a great writer you are. Just line by line, you're a terrific writer.